Welcome to our weekly market review. Now, the conflict between Israel and Hamas continues to escalate, and it's now a very real fear it could pull in both regional and global powers, shaping it into a full-scale war. Now, the conflict adds another pressure point in the geopolitical instability left in the wake of the Ukraine invasion and what seems to be as a Cold War 2.0 between the US and China. And these fears and risks are feeding into higher oil prices. Prices rose nearly 6% on Friday, and it's back to over $90 a barrel. Another factor is linked to the crackdowns on Russian oil shipments that are in contravention of US declarations, which further exacerbates supply risks. The result of higher oil prices is simple: slower growth and a second wave of inflationary pressures. This also comes as most central banks are seemingly at the end of their rate hike cycle. Both the European central banks and the Fed September minutes released last week confirmed a dovish impulse. These developments may force the hand of central banks to keep rates elevated for longer, and this complicates matters for countries struggling to gain economic traction like South Africa. Therefore, the SARB's announcement this week will be closely monitored for any hints on how the central bank plans on navigating these complexities. For now, the SARB is expected to keep rates on hold despite the rise in inflation anticipated in coming months. But this all hinges on the developments in the Middle East, and should the conflict spread, injecting further risk of sentiment into the market, we can see tremendous volatility in the currencies of emerging markets, forcing central banks to make decisions they wouldn't have otherwise considered. As markets rotated to safe havens amid the current geopolitical climate, the US dollar has consolidated near last week's highs and will keep most currencies on the defensive. Fortunately, the price of gold rose sharply in the face of worries about the expansion of the conflict, which helped to limit the rand's depreciation. Just before we get to the other events we will be tracking this week, China is reportedly planning on a 1 trillion yuan stimulus to boost growth to help meet the state's 5% growth target, and this in turn will also lend support to global economic recovery as well. Apart from the SARB's announcement, South Africa's September inflation figure will be released on Wednesday with a slight uptick expected. This is mainly due to statistical factors linked to the comparison against falling fuel prices a year ago. Fuel inflation is expected to increase sharply, while the recent bout of bird flu could potentially heighten food inflation. Ongoing rand weakness and higher oil prices are also adding to the upwards pressure. CPI figures for both Britain and the EU will also be out on Wednesday. Both could record lower inflation in September, which again will support the argument for an end to the recent hike cycle. Then out of the US, we will be looking at the retail figures out on Tuesday for any further indication of a downturn in the US economy. That then, the week that was and the one to come for the markets.